The November rain fell in sheets across the Chicago expressway, turning the asphalt black and slick like glass. Traffic moved in a crawl, brake lights bleeding red through the downpour. Somewhere in that river of metal and steel, a black Mercedes pushed forward with the practiced arrogance of a vehicle that owned the road. Rafael Valenti sat in the back seat, his 6-year-old son Noah beside him, small fingers clutching a toy truck. Rafael wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, his dark hair slicked back, revealing the scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a permanent reminder of a betrayal he had never forgotten. His hands, enormous and scarred themselves, rested on his thighs. These hands had signed contracts worth millions. These hands had made men disappear. But right now, they were just a father's hands, steady and careful as Noah babbled about school. The boy laughed at something only he could see. Rafael's chest tightened the way it always did when Noah laughed. This sound was the only prayer he had ever truly understood. The driver, a man named Rocco with a broken nose and eyes like a shark, glanced in the mirror. "We're 3 minutes from the restaurant, sir." Rafael nodded, watching the rain streak down the window. He did not see the delivery truck that had lost its brakes 2 miles up the expressway. He did not see the driver's desperate grip on the wheel as the vehicle began to slide. He did not see any of it coming. The impact came like the world splitting open. The Mercedes twisted sideways, metal screaming as it was hit broadside. Noah was thrown forward, his small head striking the window. The sound was like breaking glass. Like breaking everything that mattered. Rafael felt the vehicle flip. Felt his body crush against the ceiling. Felt something crack inside his chest that had nothing to do with broken ribs. Then silence. Then the weight of absolute stillness. Rafael pulled himself free from the twisted metal, gasping, bleeding from his temple. His eyes found Noah immediately. The boy was slumped against the door, his small face turned away, blood streaming from a gash above his right ear. "Noah." Rafael's voice cracked like ice breaking. "Noah, look at me." The boy did not move. Rafael lifted him with shaking hands, cradling him against his chest. Noah's head hung back at an angle that made Rafael's breath stop. The blood soaked into his suit jacket and he did not care. He did not care about anything except the slight, fragile warmth of his son's body. Rocco appeared, pulling open the door. Franco emerged from the front seat, dazed, moving toward them. Behind them, traffic began to pile up. Horns blared. People shouted. The world continued its indifferent rotation. "Ambulance," Rafael commanded, his voice shattering. "Call it. Now." "Sir, there's gridlock," Rocco said. "Traffic is frozen. They're saying 3 miles back. Then they will have to wait." Rafael pressed Noah's body against his chest, and a sound came from his throat that was not quite a word. "Someone help him. Please. Somebody." A man does not build an empire by begging. But Rafael Valenti had become small in that moment. He had become a father watching his son bleed, and the difference between these two versions of himself was a canyon he could not cross. Through the rain and the traffic and the chaos, a sound emerged. An engine. A small, struggling engine that did not belong to any vehicle that cost more than a used car. A battered delivery scooter weaved between the stopped vehicles, its orange light flashing weakly against the darkness. The driver wore a soaked red delivery jacket, the fabric torn at the shoulder, her hair plastered to her face. She was thin, too thin, the kind of thin that came from counting calories instead of eating them. She could not have been older than 25, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone who had lived 40 years. This was Aria Chen. She had been 4 blocks away when the crash happened, balanced on her delivery scooter with a pizza box warming her lap and $6 in tips already spent on gas. When she saw the gridlock, when she heard the sirens, she did what she always did, she moved toward the problem instead of away from it. She jumped from the scooter without turning off the engine, leaving it running in the middle of the expressway. For seconds of assessment. That was all it took. She could see the wound, the angle of the boy's head, the father's face twisted into something that looked like the end of the world. Aria moved. She ripped off her jacket, the motion causing a sharp pain in her left shoulder where old bruises still ached, and pressed the fabric against Noah's head wound. Her hands were small, calloused, marked with tiny burns from the food service job she worked between delivery shifts. She placed her fingers on the boy's neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there. Weak. But present. His airway is open, she said, her voice steady in a way that made Rocco and Franco step back. But we cannot wait for an ambulance. The gridlock is too deep. We move him now, or we lose him. Rafael's eyes met hers. In that moment, he saw something that 15 years of controlling half the city's underworld had never prepared him for. He saw someone who did not know who he was. Someone who did not fear him. Someone who was looking at his son and seeing only a child who needed saving. Take him, she said, though it was not a question. I will guide you. The emergency entrance is 2 exits south. We go now, or we do not make it. Before Rocco could move. Before Franco could speak. Before the city could take another breath, Aria lifted Noah from Rafael's arms. The boy weighed nothing. She cradled him against her chest like he was made of glass, one hand supporting his head, the other pressed against the wound. Her injured ankle, the one she had twisted 2 weeks ago but could not afford to have x-rayed, screamed with pain when she stepped back onto the expressway pavement, but her face did not change. She began to run. Through the maze of stopped vehicles. Through the rain that fell like bullets. Through the honking chaos, limping on that bad ankle, carrying a bleeding child that belonged to a man she had never seen before and would likely never see again. Rafael watched her disappear into the downpour. His hands, still shaking, still covered in his son's blood, hung useless at his sides. Get in the car, he said to Rocco. Follow her. And get me the name of that woman. The Mercedes limped forward, weaving between vehicles, following the figure in the red jacket that moved through the rain like a prayer in motion. 6 hours earlier, Aria Chen sat in the cramped bathroom of a studio apartment that smelled like mold and regret, counting the money in a mason jar. $17. That was the sum total of her existence outside of the tips she might earn today. She placed the bills on the sink in a careful line, like they were artifacts instead of currency. $1 bills, a 5, a 10. 17. Enough for gas, if she filled up at the cheapest station. Not enough for anything else. The apartment was not hers. It belonged to a woman named Patricia who worked the morning shift at the diner where Aria waited tables from 4 in the afternoon until midnight. Patricia rented her a corner of the bedroom, not even a full room, just a corner, for $350 a month. Which meant that for 3 days, Aria did not need to pay rent. She had until Friday to come up with $175, or she would be out on the street again. The calendar on the wall showed November 14th. The acceptance letter in her backpack was dated 3 months earlier. It was still torn in the envelope, the corners soft from being handled too many times. Northwestern University. Partial scholarship. $42,000 a year. The scholarship covered $18,000. The remaining $24,000 might as well have been written in a language she did not speak. She had not told anyone about the letter. Not Patricia. Not the manager at the delivery place. Not her mother, who would not understand that education was a door that only opened for people who had money standing in front of them to push it wider. Aria splashed water on her face and looked at herself in the mirror. The dark circles under her eyes had permanent homes now. Her cheekbones had become too sharp. She looked, she thought, like someone who was running out of time. She dressed in her delivery uniform, a red jacket with the restaurant logo on the back, jeans with a hole in the left knee, sneakers held together with duct tape and hope. The scooter was parked on the street below, waiting, its engine as tired as she was. It took 20 minutes to drive across the city in the afternoon traffic. 20 minutes of weaving through cars, of navigating pothole-filled streets, of fighting the cold that cut through even her thickest jacket. The diner was on Roosevelt Avenue, a place that had probably been fashionable in 1987 and had been aging ever since. She parked the scooter and went in through the kitchen entrance. Patricia was behind the counter, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She was in her 50s, with the face of someone who had made 1,000 choices she regretted. "Table 12 needs the check," she said without looking up. "And table 7 needs their water refilled." Aria moved through the diner like she had 1,000 times before. Water glasses. Check presentations. Coffee refills. Small smiles for people who did not see her. She was good at being invisible. It was a skill she had developed over 22 years of surviving. At 8:45 in the evening, just as she was finishing her shift, the phone rang. It was the delivery place. They needed someone for a rush order heading to the North Shore. 1 large pizza, 1 special appetizer plate. $45 order meant she would make maybe $6 in tip money if she was lucky. She took it without hesitation. The rain started somewhere between the diner and the restaurant where she picked up the order. Light at first. Then heavier. By the time she was navigating the expressway, it was coming down in sheets that obscured everything beyond the reach of her scooter's single headlight. She did not see the truck losing its brakes. Did not see the Mercedes weaving through traffic. Did not see any of it until the crash happened, metal twisted against metal, a sound like the world breaking. What she did see was the father on his knees. What she did see was the child with blood on his face. What she did see was the moment when the most powerful man in Chicago became utterly helpless. And in that moment, Aria Chen made a choice that would rewire the entire architecture of her small, careful life. She made the choice to run toward instead of away from. To matter instead of vanish. To believe, for just a few seconds, that she was not invisible after all. The emergency room doors slid open at 6:12 in the evening. Aria, soaked and shaking, carried Noah Valenti across the threshold and into the fluorescent light. Behind her, Rocco's car pulled up to the curb, Rafael Valenti stepping out into the rain, his blood-soaked suit jacket making him look like a man who had been through a war. The nurses took Noah immediately, rushing him toward the back. Aria watched them go, her chest heaving, her injured ankle throbbing with a pain that was almost alive. A doctor approached Rafael. "Are you family?" "Father," Rafael said. His voice was flat. A man describing a fact. "Is he?" "Come with me," the doctor said, and the word contained everything Rafael needed to know about his own future. Rafael looked back at the waiting room where Aria Chen stood dripping on the white tile, still wearing his son's blood on her hands and his son's memory like a weight she did not know how to put down. Their eyes met across the distance of the room. Rafael mouthed, "Thank you." Aria nodded. She did not speak. There were no words for what had just happened. There were only the scars on her back, the $17 in her pocket, and the knowledge that something in the world had just shifted. Something in Rafael Valenti had shifted as well. He had spent 15 years building an empire, accumulating power and money and men who would die at his word. He had filled his life with things that could be bought. But in this moment, watching a soaked delivery girl in a ripped jacket disappear back into the Chicago night, Rafael understood that the most valuable thing in the world could not be purchased. It could only be given. And that gift, once received, changed the person who received it in ways that could never be undone. Drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to understand what brought two people from completely different worlds together in a moment that would fracture everything they thought they knew about themselves. 6 hours before the expressway collapsed into chaos, Aria Chen stood in front of her bathroom mirror in the dark because the light bulb had burned out 3 weeks ago and she could not afford to replace it. The studio apartment was so small that her twin bed, her hot plate, and her plastic storage bins occupied the same visual field. $17 sat in her checking account. $85,000 was due in 3 days, rent of $850, utilities of $140, the balance of her tuition at the city college where she attended night classes for days a week, studying business administration in the hope that someday, somehow, she would earn enough to stop counting pennies in the dark. She lifted her shirt. Even without light, her fingers knew the map. Scars running in every direction like a landscape of hell. 8 years ago, Marcus had convinced her that she deserved the weight of his fists. 8 years ago, she had believed him. She still wore the evidence on her skin. Aria pulled her shirt down. Breathed. Did not cry because tears were a luxury she could not afford. The scooter waited outside, battered and honest, the paint peeling in long strips like a shedding animal. She had purchased it for $300 from a man named Jerome who asked no questions. That had been 2 years ago. The engine turned over on the third attempt, and she pointed it toward the first restaurant on her delivery list, a sushi place in the financial district where executives tipped 5% if you were lucky. The Chicago summer pressed down like a hand. 93 degrees. The humidity wrapped around her like something alive. She wore her uniform, black pants, gray polo shirt with a faded logo, and the fabric stuck to her skin in patches. By the fourth delivery, sweat had soaked through the small of her back, and she stopped at a red light, touching the fabric gently where the scars were thickest. The raised edges burned. The motion of her fingers across the fabric sent small lightning bolts of pain down her legs. Marcus's voice lived in that pain. You deserve this. You will always deserve this. No one will ever love you. No one will ever believe you. The light turned green. Aria accelerated. 23 deliveries. That was the quota. 23 orders meant $68 in her pocket if the tips came. Most days they did not. Most days, people looked through her the way you look through glass. She existed in a space between their world and the kitchen. She was nobody's daughter, nobody's sister, nobody's anything. She was a hand that delivered food and a face that people forgot before she reached her scooter. At the Vietnamese restaurant on Madison, a businessman in a suit worth more than her monthly rent handed her a $5 order for a $40 meal and did not make eye contact. At the Greek place near the river, a woman in sunglasses inside her own home did not tip at all. Aria did not protest. Protest required dignity, and dignity was a thing that lived in other people's houses. But she was fast. Her scooter moved through traffic like it was choreographed, and by 3 o'clock, she had completed 19 deliveries. For more, and she could head to night class, where Professor Morrison taught microeconomics in a room that smelled like dry marker and broken dreams. For more, and she could be useful in some small way, learning formulas and balance sheets that would maybe, someday, lead somewhere other than here. Across the city, in the back booth of Valentino's, a restaurant so exclusive that reservations were made through a lawyer, Rafael Valenti sat with documents spread across mahogany that had been imported from Italy in 1987. His tailored suit was charcoal gray, the fabric so fine it moved like water. A white shirt was open at the collar, revealing his chest and the silver chain he had worn since his mother's funeral 22 years ago. His dark hair was cut precisely, sharp lines at the temples where it had begun to gray. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and in those eyes lived 15 years of decisions that could not be undone. Rocco and Franco sat across from him, both men in their 50s, both with the weight of the organization pressed into their shoulders. The cost-love situation, Franco said. His voice was rough, weathered by cigarettes and regret. They're moving roots through Cicero. We need to respond. We will, Rafael said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. Not yet. They're testing you, Rocco said. He was smaller than Franco, sharper, with eyes that never stopped calculating. They smell hesitation. Rafael did not look up from the document. Then let them smell what they want to smell. We move when we move, not when they bait us. The truth was something else entirely. The truth was that 3 years ago, Rafael's own brother Marco had sold family roots to the Cost-Love organization. Marco, who had grown up with Rafael, who had slept in the same apartment while their mother worked 3 jobs, who had promised never to betray the blood. Marco had chosen money. $20,000 for information that cost Rafael 8 months of bloodshed and the permanent loss of 6 revenue streams. Rafael had made a choice. A man who would betray his family had to be removed like a cancer. There was no mercy in the underworld. Mercy was a disease. Rafael's choice had been correct. Marco's body had never been found, and that was all that needed to be known. But every time Rafael looked at his son, Noah, he felt the weight of that choice pressing down like a stone on his chest. "Your son is here," Franco said. His tone shifted, softened. "For the drive. You said you would take him at 3. Rafael checked his watch. A Patek Philippe worth more than Aria Chen's entire life. Exactly 3 o'clock. "Let him in," Rafael said. Noah Valenti was 7 years old, and he moved like his father, with that same careful precision that suggested every motion had been planned and executed. He wore khaki shorts and a blue shirt, and his dark hair was still wet from the shower. In his hand was a small toy dinosaur, green plastic, missing 1 foot. "Dad," he said, and the word held the weight of love and distance and all the years that Rafael had missed being a normal man with a normal family. "Come here," Rafael said, and he stood, and he let his son embrace him in a way that the men in the restaurant had learned never to witness. Rafael's face against his son's hair. His hand on Noah's small back. For 15 seconds, the most powerful man in Chicago held his son like he was the only thing worth holding. "Are we going to the lake?" Noah asked. "We are," Rafael said. "Franco says a storm is coming. We should see it before it arrives." They left Valentino's at 3:15, and the sky was still blue, and neither of them knew that the storm would arrive sooner than expected, or that the expressway would become a place where lives fractured, or that a girl on a battered scooter would matter more than all of Rafael's power combined. Meanwhile, Aria Chen was completing her 21st delivery, an order of pad thai and spring rolls for a law office in the Loop. The receptionist was a woman about her age, maybe a year or 2 older, with nails that had been professionally done, with hair that had been recently cut by someone who was not herself standing in a dark bathroom. The woman looked at Aria's soaked uniform and said nothing. Aria handed her the order and turned back toward the stairs. 22 deliveries. 1 more after this, and she would have completed her quota. 1 more and she could afford $3 for coffee at the night school cafe and still have money left for tomorrow's meals. The scooter climbed onto the expressway at 4:27 in the afternoon. The sky had changed. The blue had been replaced by something darker, something that pressed down like a warning. Wind pushed at her small vehicle, and she gripped the handlebars tighter, feeling the vibration travel up her wrists. She did not see the black Mercedes at first. It was moving too fast, weaving through traffic, the driver's hands gripping the wheel with the kind of intensity that suggested something was wrong. Rafael was concentrating on the road, on Noah in the car seat beside him, on the lightning that had begun to streak across the darkening sky. He was thinking about Marco, about choices, about the weight of power. He was not thinking about the drunk driver in the pickup truck 2 cars ahead, the man who had consumed 6 beers at a bar in Oak Park and decided that the expressway was a shortcut home. The pickup truck crossed 3 lanes in 7 seconds. The Mercedes was directly in its path. Time compressed. What happened next happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The truck's bumper connected with the Mercedes' side door, and the impact was so violent that the car lifted off the ground. The window shattered. The metal shrieked. The world spun in a way that did not make sense, and then it stopped. Silence. Aria was 200 feet away, her scooter slowing naturally as the traffic ahead froze. She watched the Mercedes impact the guardrail, watched the pickup truck skid across 3 lanes, watched the moment when the world changed from one thing to another. Without thinking, she pulled her scooter over. The final delivery could wait. The $17 could wait. Everything could wait. She ran toward the wreckage, her injured ankle screaming, her breath coming in short gasps, her mind repeating the only prayer she knew, the only words that had never failed her in 8 years of running: "Please, Please, please. The Mercedes' back door was damaged but not locked. Inside, she found a boy of 7, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, conscious, terrified, crying for his father. "I'm here," Aria said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here. You are not alone." She lifted him out of the car with hands that shook, cradling his small body against her chest, feeling his blood soak into her grey polo shirt. The pain in her ankle meant nothing. The scars on her back meant nothing. The $17 and the $85,000 and all the small accumulated humiliations of her life meant nothing. There was only a child. There was only the knowledge that she could help. There was only the desperate clarity that some moments asked you to be more than you believed you could be, and you answered or you did not, and your entire life changed based on that single decision. She ran toward the highway, toward the police cars that were already arriving, toward the ambulance that was turning on its sirens. She ran with Noah in her arms, and she did not look back. Noah Valenti lay in a hospital bed at Northwestern Memorial, his small body swallowed by white sheets, 12 stitches holding his forehead together like dark promises. The machines beside him beeped with the steady rhythm of survival, beep, 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 each sound a confirmation that he was still here, that he would be okay. A concussion, the doctors said. Some bruising. Time and rest and a father's constant vigil at 2 in the morning when the world was supposed to sleep, but Rafael Valenti could not close his eyes without seeing that moment when everything nearly shattered. He sat in the vinyl chair beside Noah's bed, his massive frame cramped into a space designed for smaller people, his hand gripping his son's small fingers like they might slip away if he loosened his grip for even a second. 15 years of running an empire, 15 years of commanding men who trembled at his word, 15 years of being the most feared name in Chicago, and none of it mattered. None of it could change the fact that his son had been bleeding in the wreckage of a car and a stranger had run into the chaos while Rafael was eating dinner, unaware, untouchable, powerless. His phone vibrated on the chair beside him. Rocco, his lieutenant for 2 decades, the man whose loyalty was written in blood and bone and habit. Rafael ignored it. The phone buzzed again. And again. Finally, he answered, his voice like gravel, like a man who had not spoken in hours and did not want to speak now. "What?" Rafael said. "Not a question. A demand." "We found her, boss," Rocco said, and in those 5 words Rafael heard the urgency, the respect, the understanding that this was not about business. This was about the only currency that mattered. The delivery girl. Aria Chen, 26 years old, works for Quick Bite food delivery service, enrolled in Northwestern's night program, studying social work. She lives alone. Bridgeport apartment, 3rd floor, lease signed for 1 year. Rafael's chest tightened. A name. A person. Not just a silhouette running toward his son through chaos. "Address," he said. Rocco gave it to him. Rafael wrote nothing down, his memory was a weapon he had spent years sharpening. When he hung up the phone, he looked at Noah's sleeping face, the child's breathing even and deep, and something in Rafael's carefully constructed world shifted on its axis. The next morning, Rafael showered and changed into a dark suit that cost more than most people's cars, and he drove himself to Bridgeport, which was a neighborhood that did not know his name, where people worked double shifts and counted every dollar and understood desperation in the way only people with nothing understand it. The apartment building was narrow, weathered, the kind of place where the radiators clanked and the walls were thin enough to hear other people's sorrows bleeding through. He stood in front of her door at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, holding an envelope containing $5,000 in cash, not enough, never enough, but a start, and he knocked. When Aria opened the door, she was wearing cleaning clothes, gray pants and a faded blue shirt, and her hair was pulled back in a way that showed the sharp angles of her face. The exhaustion settled into her cheekbones like a permanent resident. Her eyes went wide. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. "Mr. Valenti," she whispered. I just did what anyone would do." Rafael shook his head slowly. "No one else moved," he said, and his voice was low and solid like an oath, like a man who did not often explain himself but was trying to now. "You did." Noah asked for you twice before he fell asleep. He said you told him he was not alone. You said that to a stranger's child while you were bleeding yourself, while you were injured, while you were afraid. This is not enough. He held out the envelope. But let me start here. Her hands came up in a gesture of refusal, trembling like candles in a wind that could blow them out at any moment. I cannot take this. Your son is okay. That is all that matters, she said, and Rafael heard the absolute truth in those words, the absence of greed, the presence of something his world had taught him to distrust, genuine goodness. He stepped closer and he noticed things. The way she favored her left side, the subtle hitch in her movement when she thought he was not watching. The way she gripped the doorframe as if she needed it to stay standing. The faint purple shadow on her neck just visible above her collar, almost healed but not quite. Are you hurt? He asked. I am fine, she lied, and the lie was so transparent, so desperate, that it told him more than the truth would have. He did not argue. Rafael had learned long ago that some people could not be helped by force, only by patience, only by the kind of quiet persistence that respects a person's need to say no before they could say yes. He left the envelope on her doorstep anyway, pressing it gently against the doorframe, and walked away. But in the hallway, descending the stairs, each step deliberate, controlled, he spoke quietly into his phone to Rocco, keep an eye on her. Quietly. 24 hours a day. I want to know if she is safe. I want to know if anything happens. Understood, boss, Rocco said. What Rafael did not know was that someone else had noticed Aria as well, had been watching, had seen her running toward the wreckage with the clarity of a man who recognized an opportunity when it presented itself. Tyler Brennan was 28 years old, Rafael's nephew, and he lived in the space between ambition and entitlement, in that dangerous place where a man believes he deserves power simply because his name carried a certain weight. He had been eating at Valentino's restaurant the night of the accident, a plate of osso buco in front of him, a glass of 18-year-old scotch sweating in his hand, when he heard Rocco and Franco talking low and urgent in a booth 2 tables over. The delivery girl, Franco said, pulled the kid out herself. Rafael's never seen this kind of thing, Rocco replied, and Tyler's ears perked up like a predator sensing blood in the water. Tyler excused himself and walked to the bar, where he had a clear sight line to the kitchen, and he made a decision that would set everything in motion. He had been trying for years to crack Rafael's foundation, to find a weakness in the armor of the man who controlled half the city's underworld. Rafael had money, power, loyalty, but what did Rafael have that he could not replace? A son. And a son could be leveraged. A woman who saved that son could be leveraged too. 1 week later, summer was building toward a thunderstorm that everyone could taste in the air, that electric charge that made the humidity feel like a physical weight pressing down on the city. The sky above Chicago was turning the color of bruises, purple and black and an ugly shade of yellow at the edges, the kind of light that came before the sky split open. Aria worked a double shift that day, 31 deliveries, her body moving through the city like a machine, like a perfectly programmed thing designed to break down eventually but pushing forward anyway because stopping was not an option. Her back screamed with every movement, new pain layering on top of old pain, the scars from 8 years of abuse pulling tight in the heat, the accident injuries adding fresh bruises that she hid beneath loose clothing and the lie that she was fine. She had $17 left in her checking account. $17. She had counted it 3 times that morning, hoping the act of repetition might change the number, might turn it into something closer to 18. It did not. On her kitchen counter sat a torn envelope. A Northwestern University logo. The words "Congratulations" still visible despite the deliberate rip down the center. They had accepted her. Social work program. 4-year degree starting in the fall. Tuition was $85,000. Total cost of living while in school was another $15,000. She had 3 days to decide whether to accept the position or defer it for another year, and deferring for another year was just another way of saying never, because next year would bring the same $17, the same empty nights, the same impossible mathematics of poverty. She had been saving for 3 years. 3 years of skipping meals so she could put $50 a week into a savings account. She had accumulated $7,284 before the landlord raised the rent and the medical bills came from the old injuries and the transmission of her scooter started making sounds like something dying. She needed $85,000 in 3 days. The math was not difficult. It was impossible. That evening, around 6 o'clock when the first drops of rain began to fall, Aria delivered an order to Valentino's restaurant. The hostess, a woman named Catherine who always treated her with a kindness that felt like an insult because it reminded Aria that she occupied a category of person who deserved special gentleness, directed her to the private booth in the back. Rafael sat alone. Candlelight flickered across documents spread across the table in front of him, his dark eyes moving across words with the focus of a man accustomed to making decisions that changed other people's lives. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and she could see the edge of a tattoo on his forearm, a name, maybe, or a code, something written in Italian that she could not read. He looked up, and recognition crossed his face like a storm front moving across open water. Aria, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like something she had never heard before, like it mattered, like she mattered. Sit. Please. I am working, she said, her hands holding the delivery bag like it was a shield. I should not. 5 minutes, he said gently, and gentleness from a man like Rafael Valenti was a dangerous thing, like a blade wrapped in silk, because it made you forget what kind of man he was. Sit down, Aria. She Saturday. The rain was beginning to intensify outside, drumming against the windows like insistent fingers demanding entry. Rafael ordered her food without asking, pasta with butter and sage, fresh bread, water with ice, and when it arrived, he watched her eat as if her eating was a thing of profound importance to him. You have not been eating enough, he said. How would you know that? She asked, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. I notice things, he replied. Small things. The way your wrists look. The way you move like you are afraid something might break if you are not careful. I notice. He leaned forward, and in the candlelight she could see the scar that ran from the corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone, a line that told a story she was not sure she wanted to know. You saved my son's life. I want to help you. What do you need? The question was so direct, so devoid of the usual social protocols that allowed people to dance around the truth, that her defenses rose like walls around a castle under siege. I do not need anything, she said. I am fine. You are working yourself to exhaustion. I can see it in every movement you make. She looked away, toward the rain that was now coming hard against the windows, the sound of it a white noise that seemed to isolate the two of them in a bubble of candlelight and impossible conversation. Why would you help me? She asked quietly. I am nobody. The silence that followed was longer than any silence should be. Rafael set down his fork with deliberate care, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than it had been before, softer than she would have thought possible from a man who commanded men with a single glance. You are not nobody, he said. Not to me. Not to Noah. He asked for you by name yesterday. He said, the lady who carried me, is she okay? Does she need help? Can we help her? That is what he said. Because a 7-year-old child understood something that most adults spend their entire lives failing to grasp, that a person's value is not measured by their bank account. It is measured by what they do in the moment when they have nothing to gain and everything to lose. Across the restaurant, Rocco and Franco exchanged a look that neither had seen in 15 years of working for Rafael Valenti. Something had changed. Something fundamental. Aria's walls cracked like ice beginning to break in spring. She started, and then stopped, unsure how to say the thing that lived in her chest. Finally, I have tuition due. $85,000. In 3 days. I was accepted to Northwestern social work program, and I have been saving for 3 years, but I am still $85,000 short. I will defer the position. It is fine. I will pay it, Rafael said. All of it. $85,000. Aria's eyes went wide, and the fork fell from her hand to the plate with a sound like a bell ringing. No, she said. Absolutely not. I cannot accept that. Why not? Because I do not take handouts. Because I do not know what you would want in return. Because nothing in my life has ever been free and I do not believe that anything ever will be. Rafael did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was warm, rough from something, labor or violence or both, and she could feel the strength in it, the controlled power beneath his skin. I want nothing, he said finally. Only to help someone who helped me when I was powerless. Is that not worth enough? They talked for 40 minutes while the rain hammered the windows and lightning cracked across the sky like the world breaking open. Aria spoke in fragments, pieces of her history scattered across the table like shards of broken glass. A lonely childhood. Working since she was 14. No family. Always alone. Always counting. Always afraid. Rafael listened like every word was a prayer, and he was a man who had learned to hear the divine in the testimony of the broken. But what Aria did not know, what no one at Valentino's that night could have known, was that 3 booths away, hidden by the latticed privacy screen, Tyler Brennan sat with his phone raised, recording, smiling. When Aria finally left the restaurant, her mind spinning with the impossible reality of $85,000, of Northwestern, of a future that suddenly seemed less like a fantasy and more like something tangible, she did not notice the man following her into the parking lot. The rain was coming down in sheets now, the kind of rain that turned the world into a blur, that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Her scooter was parked near the back, and she was fishing for her keys when a voice cut through the sound of the downpour. You must be special. Aria turned. Tyler Brennan stood 10 feet away, his designer clothes somehow still pristine despite the rain, his smile the kind of smile that predators wear before they strike. Rafael does not talk to people like that, he said, stepping closer. He does not sit with them for 40 minutes. He does not hold their hands. Who are you? I do not know what you mean, Aria said, backing away, her scooter between them like a barrier that would do nothing if he decided to cross it. I am Tyler Brennan, he said, and she heard the weight of that name, understood that it meant something in this world, that it carried the same kind of danger as Rafael's name but without the same kind of control. Rafael's nephew. And I think you and I should get to know each other. He reached for her arm. His hand closed around her wrist, and the moment his skin touched hers, pain exploded through her back, the old scars and new bruises screaming in harmony, and her face must have shown it because his eyes lit up with something that looked like pleasure. You are hurt, he said, his grip tightening. Let me help you. Do not touch me, she said, and she twisted her arm hard, throwing her weight away from him, and she ran. Her scooter lay on the pavement behind her, forgotten, but it did not matter. Nothing mattered except the distance between herself and the man in the parking lot, the rain blinding her, her breath tearing out of her chest in ragged gasps. Behind her, Tyler laughed. A sound like breaking glass. He pulled out his phone as she disappeared into the downpour, and he called Sophie Langford. The phone rang twice before she picked up, and he could hear the ambient noise of a cocktail party, the clink of glasses, the murmur of the wealthy congratulating themselves on their own existence. I found Rafael's weakness, Tyler said without preamble. A delivery girl named Aria Chen. She just spent 40 minutes alone with him. He is clearly invested in protecting her. Dig up everything. Criminal record, family history, financial troubles, anything that can be weaponized. We are going to use her to break him. Sophie's voice, when she responded, dripped venom like a fang dripping poison. Consider it done, she said, and Tyler could hear the smile in her words, the genuine pleasure of a woman who had been given permission to destroy someone. 2 days later, Aria sat in a coffee shop called The Daily Grind, a small place wedged between a laundromat and a check-cashing store, the kind of place where people like her could afford to buy a coffee that cost $2 and sit for 20 minutes without being asked to leave. She had ordered the smallest size, black, because adding milk and sugar was an expense she could not justify, and she was staring into it like it contained answers when someone sat down across from her. Sophie Langford was 32 years old, and she wore her cruelty like cologne, like a perfume that preceded her into every room. Her designer clothes looked like they had been surgically attached to her skin, each piece chosen to announce her access to things that Aria would never have. Her hair was professionally highlighted, her nails professionally manicured, her smile professionally practiced and completely devoid of warmth. "You are Aria Chen, right?" Sophie asked, like she did not already know the answer. "The girl who saved Noah Valenti." Aria's stomach dropped. "How do you know that?" she asked quietly. "Everyone knows," Sophie said, leaning back in her chair with the casual confidence of someone who had never been refused anything in her life. "You are trending on social media. The hero delivery girl, the poor girl who saved the rich man's child. It is very compelling." Sophie's smile sharpened, becoming something with teeth. "I run a media platform with 4 million followers. I would love to interview you, share your story with the world. It would be good for you. Exposure. Recognition." Aria shook her head, pushing back from the table. "I do not want attention. I just want to be left alone." Sophie's mask slipped for just a moment, and Aria saw the cruelty underneath, raw and hungry. "That is not how this works, sweetheart," Sophie said, her voice dropping to something intimate and threatening at the same time. "You entered Rafael Valenti's world. There is no going back now. People are going to be interested in you. People are going to want to know your story. You can either tell it yourself and control the narrative, or I can tell it for you, and I promise you, my version will be far less kind." She left a business card on the table, cream-colored, embossed with gold lettering, and stood up with the fluid grace of someone entirely comfortable in her own skin. "Think about it," Sophie said. "You have my number." When she was gone, Aria sat alone at the small table, her cold coffee in front of her, the business card like a threat made of paper and ink. The deadline for Northwestern was tomorrow. She would have to accept the tuition payment from Rafael. She had already made that decision when he offered it, even though every part of her screamed that nothing was free, that every gift came with a price written in blood. But now there was this. Tyler's smile. Sophie's venom. The knowledge that by accepting Rafael's help, by stepping into his world, she had made herself a target, had become leverage, had transformed from nobody into something that other people could use. Back in her apartment that night, she sat on her bed and counted her $17 again. $17 and $85,000 coming tomorrow, and an acceptance letter to school, and a future that felt like walking toward a cliff in the dark, never quite sure where the ground ended. She pulled out her phone and opened the email from Northwestern. The cursor hovered over the accept button. Outside her window, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming under the sodium lights of the street. She clicked accept. The sun had not yet risen over Chicago when Aria's phone began to scream. 47 missed calls. 132 text messages. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the notifications, each one a small blade cutting deeper than the last. Sophie Langford's media platform had published at 3:02 in the morning. The headline burned across her screen in letters that felt like fire: "Gold digger delivery girl seduces Mafia boss after staged rescue." Beneath it, photos. Doctored images of her and Rafael together, her face digitally placed into scenarios that never happened, quote she never spoke attributed to her like confessions. "I targeted him for his money," one fake quote read. "I knew the boy was his son. I staged everything," said another. The comment section was a war zone. Thousands of strangers had taken 2 minutes to build monuments of cruelty with their words. She sat on the edge of her bed, the torn acceptance letter to Northwestern still folded on her nightstand, and she watched her name trend on 3 separate platforms. Not trending because of anything good. Trending because Sophie Langford had decided to erase her. The comments came in waves: trashy, gold digger. She probably made up the abuse story for sympathy. Another desperate girl using a man. Delete her. She does not deserve Northwestern. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, it was already too late. QuickBytes manager, Derek, would not even look at her when she arrived for her shift at 8 a.m. He stood behind the counter with his arms crossed, his weathered face set like concrete. "I am sorry," Aria. I cannot have this. Customers are calling, asking if we employ you, saying they will not order if you are here. It is bad for business. Really bad. I need you to go home. Derek, please. It is not true. None of it is. I believe you, he said, and his voice carried genuine sadness, which somehow made it worse than anger. But believing you does not fix this. I have to protect my restaurant. You understand that. She walked out into the summer heat without clocking out, and the automatic door swished shut behind her like the closing of a coffin lid. By noon, Aria sat on the curb outside the restaurant, still wearing her quick bite uniform, her paycheck for the last 2 weeks, $163, in her pocket alongside the original $17. $280 total. Her tuition payment was due in 4 hours. $85,000. The acceptance letter sat in her apartment, still waiting for her to officially enroll. She stared at her phone and realized the thing that had seemed impossible before was now happening. She was running out of time and running out of choices simultaneously. A black car pulled up beside her. The back window lowered, and Tyler Brennan's face emerged from the shadows inside, his smile sharp and knowing. Rough morning, he said, and the casual cruelty in his tone made her stomach drop. Aria stood quickly, her legs unsteady. I am not getting in that car. Tyler's expression shifted, the smile vanishing like it had never existed. His voice dropped to something cold. Get in the car, Aria. We need to talk. 2 men blocked the sidewalk behind her. Solid men in dark suits, the kind of men who did not look like they asked permission before making someone do things. She had nowhere to go but into the car. The interior smelled like expensive cologne and leather seats worth more than her annual rent. Tyler settled back, casual, crossing one leg over the other as the car pulled into traffic. I am trying to be nice, he said. Do not make this difficult. What do you want? Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, trembling like a candle in the wind. Simple transaction. Rafael cares about you. That makes you valuable to me. Tyler turned his phone so she could see the screen. Photos appeared. Not of her, of someone else. A woman with dark hair and hollow eyes, someone from her past, someone tied to the 8 years she had never spoken aloud. This is Maria Suarez. You lived with her at the Riverside house in 2016. She remembers you very well. She has been very eager to talk about what happened in that house. What was done to you? What was done to others? She has evidence. Photographs. Medical records. She is prepared to sell her story to Sophie, who will publish everything. Your name, your face, your entire history, broadcast to the world. Aria's chest constricted. No. Yes, Tyler said, his voice turning liquid smooth. Unless you convince Rafael to step aside from his operations and hand control to me. You tell him you need him to do this for your safety. You tell him that Tyler Brennan has made demands, that people will get hurt if he does not comply, and that the only way to protect you is for him to leave power. You have 24 hours. I do not have anything to do with Rafael's business, she whispered, but the words were hollow, and they both knew it. You do now, Tyler said. He leaned closer, and she could smell his cologne, sharp and chemical. You do now, because I need him vulnerable. I need him distracted. And you, Aria, are his weakness. He's beautiful, broken, nobody turns somebody weakness. He pushed her out of the car onto the sidewalk. She landed hard, palms scraping asphalt, and the car door locked with a heavy click. Through the window, she watched Tyler's face one more time before the vehicle pulled away into traffic, disappearing into the flow of the city. That night, rain returned to Chicago, and the weather report called it biblical. Aria sat on the floor of her apartment as water hammered against the windows and lightning fractured the sky. Her laptop sat open, the Northwestern acceptance page still waiting for her confirmation. The deadline notification glowed red, for hours remaining. On the table beside her lay the torn acceptance letter and the $17 she had kept from the restaurant, plus the $163 from Derek as severance. $280. 85,000 short. She pulled a pen and paper toward her, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold the writing instrument steady. The words came slowly, each one a brick in a wall she was building between herself and Rafael, between herself and hope, between herself and the possibility of being more than her scars. Rafael, she wrote. I cannot let you be destroyed because of me. Tyler is using me to hurt you. Sophie is using me to ruin you. I thought I could be brave, but I am not brave. I am just a delivery girl who saved a boy and somehow ended up mattering to someone for the first time in my life, and I cannot let that matter cost you everything. I am leaving Chicago tonight. Please do not look for me. You made me believe I could be more than my scars, but some things are too broken to fix. I am sorry. Aria. She folded the letter and set it on the table. Her hands were shaking worse now. She stood to walk to her bedroom and pack, but her legs buckled. Pain shot through her lower back so sharp and sudden that she gasped, collapsing against the wall, her body betraying her the same way it always did. I cannot close my legs, it hurts, she sobbed into the darkness, sliding down to sit on the cold floor. The old scars, the ones from 8 years ago, were pulling tight under her shirt. The accident injuries were layered on top of them, creating a symphony of agony that made her vision blur and her breath come in ragged gasps. She sat there in the dark apartment as rain hammered down, wondering if running would save anyone or if she was simply trading one kind of invisible death for another. Her phone buzzed on the table. An unknown number. One message, I know what Tyler is doing. I have evidence. Meet me. Before she could respond, her door exploded open. Rafael stood in the frame, rain-soaked and wild-eyed, Rocco and Franco flanking him like bookends of violence. His face was stricken in a way she had never seen, his eyes scanning the apartment until they landed on her crumpled on the floor. You are not leaving, he said. Aria looked up from where she sat, tears streaming down her face. You cannot be here. Tyler will. I know what Tyler is doing. I know about Sophie. I know everything. Rafael crossed the apartment in 4 strides and knelt beside her on the floor. His eyes moved across her face, her body, taking inventory of her pain. Let me help you. I cannot close my legs, it hurts, she sobbed again, the words tumbling out without permission, her body failing her in front of him, shame flooding through her like floodwater. I cannot, it hurts. Rafael's face cracked. Tears filled his eyes for the first time in 15 years, spilling down his cheeks like he had been shot from the inside. What did they do to you? His voice broke completely, each word fractured. She turned slightly, lifted her shirt just enough to show the edge of the scars mapping her back. Raised lines. Old burns. A history of hell written on skin. 8 years of silence made visible. Rafael made a sound like something inside him had shattered. He was crying openly now, this man who commanded empires, who made decisions that altered the fate of thousands, completely undone by the sight of her pain. I am so sorry, he whispered, pulling her into his arms carefully, as if she were made of glass. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. They sat on the floor together as the rain drummed against the windows, 2 broken people finding shelter in each other's brokenness, the storm drowning the city outside. Then Rafael's phone rang. Rocco answered, listened, then looked at his boss. His face had gone white. Boss. You need to see this. The video was everywhere. Security footage from Valentino's showing Tyler cornering Aria in the parking lot, his voice crystal clear, you tell him you need him to step down, or I make your life hell. And hers. You have 24 hours. Another video appeared within minutes. Sophie Langford in her office, coaching a woman to lie on camera about Aria, her laughter sharp and cruel, just say she targeted him, that she is a manipulator, that you saw her take money from his office. Destroy her completely. Then another. Tyler on a recorded call, his exact words, I am leveraging her trauma to force Rafael out. He cares about her, so she is the perfect weapon. The evidence went viral in 8 minutes. By the time Rocco finished explaining what was happening, the video had been viewed by 2 million people. Comments were exploding, not against Aria anymore, but against Tyler and Sophie. Outrage. Fury. The exposure of predators caught in their own cruelty, unfiltered and undeniable. News outlets picked up the story within minutes. The leak's source remained unknown, but Rafael suspected it was one of Tyler's own men, disgusted by how far his cousin had sunk. Tyler's phone began to light up. Every associate he had ever worked with was texting the same thing: "We are out. Do not contact us." Sophie's sponsors were pulling funding by the minute. Her platform was crashing under backlash. Within 20 minutes, her name was trending worldwide not as an influencer, but as a cruel socialite exposed. Tyler called Rafael at 2:13 in the morning, his voice shaking so badly he could barely speak. "Uncle, please, I did not mean." Rafael's voice was ice. "You threatened someone I care about. You used her trauma as a weapon. You are done." He hung up. Federal agents arrived at dawn. By then, Rafael had spent weeks quietly feeding information about Tyler's separate illegal activities to contacts within the FBI. The raid was surgical and absolute. Black SUVs surrounded Tyler's penthouse. Agents in tactical gear moved through his residence like ghosts. He collapsed trembling like a cornered animal as cameras flashed outside, the golden nephew reduced to a criminal in handcuffs on every screen in America. 40 years federal prison. No bail. Racketeering. Extortion. Assault. Sophie was arrested separately that same morning. Outside her penthouse, designer heels clicking against pavement as FBI agents led her away in handcuffs. Public arrest. Her empire dismantled in a single day, every asset frozen, every partnership dissolved. Justice delivered not by death, too quick, too easy, too merciful, but by systematic destruction. The kind that echoes for decades. Every day we choose between fear and trust, between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. 2 weeks after the federal agents took Tyler away in handcuffs, Aria sat in a private medical office on the 42nd floor of a steel and glass tower overlooking Lake Michigan. The specialist across from her, Dr. Aria Chen, no relation, though Aria found comfort in the shared name, held scans up to the light. X-rays. MRI images. A roadmap of damage written in shadow and bone. The accident injuries we can address, Dr. Chen said, pointing to the newer trauma along Aria's lower spine. But these other marks, these older injuries, they've had time to calcify. Scar tissue. Nerve damage. It's treatable, though not completely reversible. Aria did not look at the images. She had stopped looking at her own body years ago, had learned instead to live inside it like a tenant in a building she did not own. Cost? Rafael asked. His voice came from the corner of the room where he stood, having arrived moments after Aria was called back from the waiting area. She had not known he was coming. He was always appearing this way, immaterial and present before she could prepare herself for his presence. The surgery, comprehensive reconstruction, physical therapy, medications? Approximately $47,000 total, Dr. Chen said. Insurance will cover some, but realistically, out-of-pocket expenses will be significant. Rafael turned to Dr. Chen. Do it. Whatever she needs. Whatever timeline works best. Cost is irrelevant. You cannot just, Aria started, but Rafael's eyes found hers and held them. I can, he said. I will. The surgery was scheduled for the following Wednesday. Aria spent the days before it in a state of suspended disbelief, moving through Northwestern's campus like a ghost attending its own funeral. Her acceptance letter, the one she had cried over in the hospital room what felt like a lifetime ago, hung framed in her new apartment now. The tears had dried on the paper long ago. The creases had set permanent. But the words remained unchanged, accepted. Full scholarship. Begin fall semester. Rafael had paid the remaining $85,000 himself, though he did not tell her until 3 days after she had signed the surgery consent forms. They were sitting in his office, and he said it as casually as someone might mention the weather. "Your tuition is handled. Northwestern. For years, all expenses. Room, board, books. Everything." Aria stood so quickly her chair fell backward. "No. Absolutely not. I did not agree to that. I cannot accept." "You saved my son's life," Rafael said. His voice was steady, immovable as stone. "A boy who was supposed to die in a car on a rain-soaked expressway. Instead, he is home. He is alive. He is drawing pictures of dinosaurs and asking about you every single day. Do you understand what you gave me? That is not the same as." "Let me do this," he said. Not a command. Something closer to a plea. "Please." She sat back down. There was nothing left to argue against, not really. Just the weight of being cared for, which felt heavier than any burden she had carried alone. The surgery lasted 8 hours and 15 minutes. Rafael waited in a private room on the surgical floor, the kind of room that was more hotel than hospital, leather chairs, a window with a view, coffee that did not taste like antiseptic. Rocco was with him. Then Franco. Then neither, as Rafael asked them to leave so he could sit alone with the sound of machines beeping in the hallway and the knowledge that Aria was lying unconscious while doctors worked to undo what another man had spent 8 years creating. When she emerged from recovery, sedated and swollen, Rafael sat beside her bed and held her hand. He did this every day for the first week. Noah came on the 3rd day, bringing drawings he had made, stick figures with yellow hair and red hearts. Aria, he had drawn beneath them. Happy. "When is she coming home?" Noah asked, studying the machines and tubes with the unsentimental curiosity of childhood. "Soon," Rafael said. "When she heals." The healing took 3 weeks, then 4. Physical therapy started in week 2, Aria wincing through exercises designed to rebuild strength in damaged muscles. But something else was rebuilding too, something quieter and less visible. Trust, maybe. Or the beginning of believing she deserved care. One evening in week 4, when the bandages had been removed and the scars, old and new, were visible on her back, Aria sat in the hospital's garden. September light turned everything gold. The air smelled like cut grass and the faint chemical tang of the building behind her. She was still tender, moving carefully, but she could move. Rafael found her on the bench without her asking him to come. He simply appeared, the way he did, and sat beside her at a careful distance. 8 years, Aria said. She was looking at the trees, not at him. His name was Marcus. He said I deserved it because I was nothing. I believed him because I was young and scared and I had nowhere else to go. Rafael's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. You are not nothing. I stayed, she continued. 11 years old when it started. 19 when I finally left. I stayed because I thought that was all I was worth. She turned to look at him then. Why do you care? You barely know me. Because you acted when no one else would, Rafael said. His eyes held no pity, only absolute certainty. Because you are stronger than anyone I have ever met. Because when I look at you, I do not see someone broken. I see someone who survived. And I see someone worth everything. She began to cry then, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deeper than sadness. He reached for her hand, careful of her injuries, and simply held it. No words after that, just presence. Just proof that someone could know your damage and not leave. I paid your tuition, he said when her breathing steadied. All $85,000. You start Northwestern in 4 weeks. Everything is arranged. She tried to protest, but he shook his head. It is done. No arguments. This is happening, Aria. You are going to class. You are going to heal. You are going to become whoever you decide to be. She laughed through the tears. You are impossible. I have been told, he said. For weeks later, she walked into Feinberg Hall for the first time as a Northwestern student. The campus felt like a different country, manicured lawns, buildings that glowed with knowledge, students who carried their futures like light. She carried hers in a backpack that had belonged to someone else 6 months ago. Everything in her life had belonged to someone else once. Now she was learning to own it. Rafael helped her move into her apartment, a safe building in a good neighborhood with locks that actually worked and neighbors who nodded in greeting instead of closing their eyes in fear. He stood in the doorway when she was unpacked, looking at the framed acceptance letter, at the books stacked on the desk, at the life she was building. Text me if you need anything, he said. Rafael. It is not negotiation, he said, and kissed her forehead before leaving. They texted constantly that first week. Aria telling him about her classes, about the trauma psychology professor who had studied domestic violence for 20 years, about how something inside her was waking up. Rafael telling her that Noah had asked about her every morning. That he missed seeing her. That he was proud of her. 8 weeks into the semester, Rafael invited her to Valentino's. The same private booth, the same candlelight that made the world outside disappear. But everything was different now. The debt had transformed into something neither of them had expected. They talked for 3 hours. About his grandmother who had raised him after his mother died. About the choice he had made to protect his family that still haunted him, the decision about his brother, about mercy, about survival. Aria listened the way she was learning to listen in her classes, not fixing, not judging, just bearing witness. How do you forgive so easily? He asked her. She reached across the table and took his hand. I do not. But I am learning to trust. Standing outside the restaurant later, under a sky full of stars that were visible even over Chicago's light pollution, Rafael asked her something that sounded simple but felt like the most complicated question anyone had ever asked her. Can I see you again? He said. Not as a debt. Not as obligation. Just because I want to. Aria smiled for the first time in years without sadness underneath it. I would like that. He did not kiss her, not yet. But the promise of it hung between them like hope. 3 months later, Aria stood on Northwestern stage in a cap and gown that felt like armor and accomplishment. She had completed her first semester at the top of her class. Rafael and Noah sat in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. The program she was in was designed for mature students returning after hardship. Every person in her cohort carried a story. Aria had learned to see her scars not as something to hide but as something that gave her credibility, that gave her voice weight. She started an internship at a domestic violence shelter the week after graduation. The work broke her open and stitched her back together simultaneously. She stood in front of a group of survivors 2 months into the internship, many of them younger than she had been when her own nightmare started. You are not what happened to you, she said, and meant every word with the absolute certainty that only someone who had lived it could possess. You are what you choose to become after. And I promise you, becoming is possible. Rafael watched from the doorway, pride and love undisguised on his face. In a federal prison cell for hours north of Chicago, Tyler Brennan sat on a bunk and watched news coverage of Aria's shelter work on a communal television. She had become the thing he feared most, not powerful through fear, but powerful through authenticity. Her voice reached millions. His reached no one. Sophie Langford worked a retail job now under an assumed name, and sometimes, between the humiliation of her fall and the mundane repetition of folding clothes and processing returns, customers would recognize her. Would whisper. Would remember. Justice had not been a bullet or a blade. It had been complete and total irrelevance. The exact thing she had tried to inflict on Aria. September turned to October. Rafael and Noah took Aria to Grant Park on a Sunday when the weather was perfect and the city glowed like something alive. Noah ran ahead, chasing pigeons that had no intention of being caught. Rafael and Aria sat on a bench with the Chicago skyline behind them like a backdrop to their own small story. He held her hand. Are you happy? She looked at him, at Noah, at the life she had built from $17 and a torn acceptance letter and the radical decision to trust. I am learning to be, she said. For the first time, I think I am learning. What changed? I stopped running, she said. I stopped believing I had to carry everything alone. He kissed her forehead gently, a gesture that had become familiar and safe. You never have to again. The camera pulls back as the sun begins to set. The city lights come on in sequence like stars being born. Every day we choose between fear and trust, between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. Aria Chen chose trust, and it did not make her weak. It made her unstoppable. Because the most powerful thing in the world is not control or money or strength. It is the courage to let someone see your scars and believe you are still worth loving. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear that survival is not the end of the story, it is the beginning. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about second chances and the strength it takes to believe in them again. What would you do if someone saw your scars and did not run? Tell me in the comments below. We read every single one. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.